We've done it. We've survived 24 hours in this small little place. Beautiful painting. Must have been made by the king himself. Do you think so, little shade? I better take this with me. Indeed we shall. Farewell, little broom. Huh. This is a strange place. It's not where we began, but that's normal because the door changes every 24 hours to a different location. You could, if you wanted to, perhaps use it to teleport around. However, I think each time you enter, you may have to wait 24 hours before you can leave again. I've never put it to the test. I think someone asked the question, what would happen if you were back there when the game time reaches 0000? The developer answered, well, you would just have to remember when 24 hours would have elapsed. But time is still continuing, even though you can no longer see it. Fallen brother, returning home. We're gonna head home in a bit, but since we're up here, near where all the cool glowing mushrooms are, I just wanted to pay it a visit. And yes, some people have wondered if the other side of a door could be someplace that you've never been to before. And we can tell from charting the door that it does indeed only appear in the 7 places that we know of. When it comes to secrets, the game has given us the clues for secrets, such as the door itself. That is an amazing secret, I think. Hey, Spider Bro. Our Spider Bro has been living up here for almost 200 days. Well, no, he's been living here in general longer than we've been alive, but with his new home, that new web. This isn't the normal time that I stream for this game, and that's just because of how the time lined up for us. I did manage to, it took several hours, but I did manage to get the shade to go sleep. A coal? We wanted the squeaky mushroom. Ah. That one wasn't very bright. Like with the mushroom, once the effects wear off, time's gonna advance 1 hour. The same is true for the shade. If you leave him alone long enough, he'll fall asleep, and he'll have a dream similar to this one. And again, time will advance 1 hour. And that's what we did. But for the shade to fall asleep, it took 2 or 3 hours, I got up and moved the shade once because I was uncertain if it was the ground itself that the shade needed a flat surface to sleep on. I don't know. So I moved him to a flat surface, let a few hours pass, and he had a dream. As you can see the time, it's jumped ahead an hour. So we did that, and because of it, time shifted. We didn't want to start the stream, and we would just be hanging out in that little closet room for another half an hour before it opened. So I wanted to push it along. The downside of it, when it came to me checking on the game to see when is the door gonna open. Oh, it's opening soon. It's almost now. So in a quick rush, we jumped into the game just in time so we can see the door arriving. It's moments like that that bring me back to the game, to just want to be here again. In these caves, listening to this music, walking around with a mushroom of a lantern. To me, there's something really magical about it. Something that's just fun. I'm in no rush to beat the game. Sometimes it's just, I've seen other people post this as well, where they wanted a sequel, or like a screensaver, or they'll just leave the game on just to hang out with the shade in the background. Just to have the shade chilling, doing his thing, sharing his thoughts while you're off in some other screen, or you're just leaving the shade on his own monitor or a TV. And I think part of that comes from the developers' interest in idle games and incorporating idle game mechanics into the longing. The shade will take care of himself. He's big enough to walk on his own. We can just let him walk and we'll go off and do our own things. It's very different than other idle mechanics that require more input or more active gameplay for the rewards. There's also, it's called a virtual pet, a Tamagotchi, where you daily have to take care of it. This digital animal, you have to give it attention, you have to feed it, you have to clean up after it. And that's okay, and that's fun and all, but I like how the developer went in his own direction from that, where we don't have to feed the shade. We don't have to take care of him. He doesn't technically need to sleep. He will on his own time if he's bored or whatever, or if you're away. And the departure from that has made for something that experimental for sure. Didn't know how it would be received, but it has been received well. Yeah, those caves in particular, they're one of my favorite. Since we were nearby, I just wanted to pay it a visit. What will happen here? I think the shade will probably eat the mushroom on his own, rather than interrupt us. No, he's just interrupting himself. I know if we're idle long enough, he'll probably eat it. Let's see. Yeah, I didn't press that. Oh, but the shade is still stopped. Little spidery friend just like staring at him. Don't you dare. I also like that the fourth wall is never broken. The shade never speaks to you, the player. The king never speaks to you, the player. Everything is done through the eyes of the shade. The shade, when he talks, he's more of just thinking out loud. I do that. I think it's a healthy thing to do. It's kind of adding significance to just ordinary thoughts, to thoughts that are meaningful. And when they've become meaningful, you just say them out loud. For me, it's kind of, if it's an idea of something I really want to do or something I want to write, just by saying it out loud, it helps me to remember it. That it's not just a thought, it's something I want to act on or do. I do a lot of creative things, so this is just one of my mechanisms for remembering if I'm in a place where I don't have a phone around or anything to write with. Shade's a creative too, right? He plays music, he draws pictures. The Shade understands. Speaking of random thoughts, I don't think it unusual that the shade is made of coal. Considering just walking around, there's so much of it here. We could have been made from granite or crystals, but the king chose this cool instead. I think it works well for the shade. Works with his name. Well, it's hard to say, is that a name or is that just what he is, a shade? I know a lot of players have named their shade. I haven't. Not because I think him not deserving of a name. I think he's just fine without having one. He can be what he is. He doesn't have to define it as something, not everything needs a name given to it. It's like when you are writing a story or a song, and the hardest part is, what do we call it now? Oh, we need a title? Dang. And then you'll spend so much time considering, let's call it this, let's call it that. I can imagine the difficulty of trying to release a video game that doesn't have a title. Like Steam, what are you going to search for? Just, is it default when you open up a search engine? It's just there, always by default, because it just doesn't have an entry, or can you not find it because you have to search with something? Would people create their own name for it? Untitled book. It would have to be an interesting book that in some way is pointless. Not that it's pointless to read, but that you couldn't just sum it up with a single point. Like the longing. We consider the longing, we talk about the longing, we feel the longing playing this. So if you had a game that didn't have some major point that everything comes to, you could just call it Untitled, right? I just say that because if you let other people read it, and you wanted to call it Untitled, but after them reading it, from fresh eyes even, and they can make suggestions, you should call it this because it's about this, then you probably should call it that, or something similar to that, because there's a point there to be made. You get what I mean? So what kind of story would it be where there isn't that point? But it was still worth the journey. Some of this stuff, it is philosophy. To me, this is just how I think. I think weird things like that. I think that's why I took some interest in wanting to read Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I was saying it backwards. Because it was written by Nietzsche. It was written in German, famous book of philosophy. And the character, Zarathustra, he does mention certain virtues, that it's okay to not name them. Because sometimes naming them, it starts to grow a following, a herd of people. Oh, this virtue? Yes, I am also one who, it now has a pack of people, a following, and it becomes less of something you discover on your own, something new, creating something new. He talks about that being like a child. I think of it as just being creative. And there are people who have, I think, forgotten how to be creative or have lost that. Some people, they say they've never been creative. I don't know if that's the case. It's like saying you've never been athletic. Most people have the potential to be athletic. There are some people with disabilities, it's unfortunate, who don't have as much ability. But there are people with wheelchairs and such who do their best. And they can be athletic anyway. It doesn't mean they all are. You can definitely develop the ability to be non-athletic. But you could also change that. And I think the same with creativity. That was the analogy. That even though you've perhaps never spent any time at it, that you could. I think just playing games and enjoying games takes a certain element of creativity. And there are people who play games who even lose that. And I think those people are toxic, perhaps. Where they're playing the game for something other than what it was intended for. Granted, if you're playing a game and you're having fun, it's still what it's intended for. I want to pick that up. There we go. We'll put it there for now, and then we'll move it further downstairs. What a colorful crystal. It's green, it's red, it's purple. It's kind of cool right here. This is kind of cool right here as well. Let me just shift it. Yeah, now we have one at the top of the stairs and one at the bottom. All right, enough decorating. Since we're at home, let's take a look. We did pick up a few new books. And since we were out spending the day adventuring, I think we're going to have a short reading day. Now that we're at the next 100 days, I think this is a good time to start the next Zarathustra book. So we've picked up 3 new books. The last ones we had were A lot of Monte Cristo. Oh. Oh. Well, that's a bug, because we only picked up one of the books that were inside that location, and we left the other two. When I started the game today, the other books that were normally there were not there. So I'll probably reach out to the developer, mention that as a bug. Most people don't just pick up one book and walk away. But, oh well, we're short some books. Perhaps we'll go find the secret door sometime. And we'll open it up, take a look inside, see if they've respawned or something. Third part. Ye look aloft when ye long for exaltation, and I look downward because I am exalted. Who among you can at the same time laugh and be exalted? He who climbeth on the highest mountains laugheth at all tragic plays and tragic realities. Zarathustra. 1. Reading and Writing. Chapter 45. The Wanderer. Then, when it was about midnight, Zarathustra went his way over the ridge of the isle, that he might arrive early in the morning at the other coast, because there he meant to embark. For there was a good roadstead there, in which foreign ships also liked to anchor. Those ships took so many people with them who wished to cross over from the Happy Isles. So, when Zarathustra thus ascended the mountain, he thought on the way of his many solitary wanderings from youth onwards, and how many mountains and ridges and summits he had already climbed. I am a wanderer and mountain climber, said he to his heart. Maybe that's what it is, talking out loud. You're speaking to your heart. I love not the plains, and it seemeth I cannot long sit still. And whatever may still overtake me as fate and experience, a wandering will be therein, and a mountain climbing. In the end, one experienceth only oneself. The time is now past when accidents could befall me, and what could now fall to my lot, which would not already be mine own. It returneth only. It cometh home to me at last, mine own self, and such of it as hath been long abroad, and scattered among things and accidents. And one thing more do I know. I stand now before my last summit, and before that which hath been longest reserved for me. My hardest path must I ascend. I have begun my lonesomest wandering. He, however, who is of my nature, doth not avoid such an hour, the hour that saith unto him, Now only dost thou go on the way to thy greatness. Summit and abyss, these are now comprised together. Thou goest the way to thy greatness, now hath it become thy last refuge. What was hitherto thy last danger. Thou goest the way to thy greatness. It must now be thy best courage, that there is no longer any path behind thee. Thou goest the way to thy greatness. Here shall no one steal after thee. Thy foot itself hath effaced the path behind thee, and over it standeth written impossibility. And if all ladders henceforth fail thee, then must thou learn to mount upon thine own head. How couldst thou mount upward otherwise? Upon thine own head, and beyond thine own heart. Now must the gentlest in thee become the hardest. He who hath always much indulged himself, sickeneth at last by his much indulgence. Praises on what maketh hearty. I do not praise the land where butter and honey flow. To learn to look away from oneself is necessary in order to see many things. This hardiness is needed by every mountain climber. He, however, who is obtrusive with his eyes as a discerner, how can he ever see more of anything than its foreground? But thou, O Zarathustra, wouldst view the ground of everything, and its background. Thus must thou mount even above thyself, upwards, until thou hast even thy stars under thee. Yea, to look down upon myself, and even upon my stars, that only would I call my summit. That hath remained for me as my last summit. Thus spake Zarathustra to himself while ascending, comforting his heart with harsh maxims, for he was sore at heart, and he had never been before. And when he had reached the top of the mountain ridge, behold, there lay the other sea spread out before him. And he stood still, and was long silent. The night, however, was cold at this height, and clear and starry. I recognize my destiny, said he at last, sadly. Well, I am ready. Now hath my last lonesomeness begun. This somber, sad sea below me, this somber nocturnal vexation, fate, and see, to you must I now go down. Before my highest mountain do I stand, and before my longest wandering. Therefore must I first go deeper down than I ever ascended. Deeper down into pain than I ever ascended, even into the darkest flood. So willeth my fate. Well, I am ready. Whence come the highest mountains? So did I once ask. Then did I learn that they came out of the sea. That testimony is inscribed on their stones and on the walls of their summits. Out of the deepest must the highest come to its height. Thus spake Zarathustra on the ridge of the mountain where it was cold. When, however, he came into the vicinity of the sea, and at last he stood alone among the cliffs, then had he become weary on his way, and eagerer than ever before. Everything as yet sleepeth, said he, even the sea sleepeth. Drowsily and strangely doth its eye gaze upon me. But it breatheth warmly, and I feel it. And I also feel that it dreameth. It tosseth about dreamily on hard pillows. Hark, hark, how it groaneth with evil recollections, or evil expectations. I am sad with thee, thou dusky monster, and angry with myself, even for thy sake, that my hand hath not strength enough. Gladly, indeed, would I free thee from evil dreams. And while Zarathustra thus spake, he laughed at himself with melancholy and bitterness. What, Zarathustra, said he, wilt thou even sing consolation to the sea? Thou amiable fool, Zarathustra, thou too blindingly confiding one. But thus hast thou ever been, and hast thou approached confidently all that is terrible. Every monster which thou caressed, a whiff of warm breath, a little soft tuft on its paw, and immediately wert thou ready to love and lure it. Love is the danger of the lonesomest one, love to anything. If it only live, laughable, verily, is my folly and my modesty in love. I'm going to take a drink. Thus spake Zarathustra, and laughed, thereby a second time. Then, however, he thought of his abandoned friends, and as if he had done them a wrong with his thoughts, he upbraided himself because of his thoughts. And forthwith it came to pass that laughter wept, with anger, and longing wept Zarathustra bitterly. So here he was, having this moment, talking to himself about loving anything. And sometimes that's the danger of lonesomeness, is just love. And you just want to attach someone, something to that. And then he had a thought of his friends. And there, that feeling of love attached itself, and he wept. With anger and longing. Chapter 46, The Vision and the Enigma. When it got abroad among the sailors that Zarathustra was on board the ship, for a man who came from the Happy Isles had gone on board with him, there was a great curiosity and expectation, but Zarathustra kept silent 2 days, and was cold and deaf with sadness, so that he neither answered looks nor questions. On the evening of the second day, however, he again opened his ears, though he still kept silent, for there were many curious and dangerous things to be heard on board the ship, which came from afar, and was to go still further. Zarathustra, however, was fond of all those who make distant voyages, and disliked to live without danger. And, behold, when listening, his own tongue was at last loosened, and the ice of his heart broke. Then did he begin to speak thus: To you, the daring venturers and adventurers, and whoever hath embarked with cunning sails upon frightful seas, to you, the enigma intoxicated, the twilight enjoyers, whose souls are allured by flutes to every treacherous gulf. For ye dislike to grope at a thread with cowardly hand, and where ye can divine, there do ye hate to calculate. To you only do I tell the enigma that I saw, the vision of the lonesomest one. Gloomily walked I lately in corpse-colored twilight, gloomily and sternly, with compressed lips, not only one sun had set up for me, a path which ascended daringly among boulders, an evil, lonesome path, with neither herb nor shrub any longer cheered, mountain path, crunched under the daring of my foot, mutely marching over the scornful clinking of pebbles, trampling the stone that let it slip. Thus did my foot force its way upwards, in spite of the spirit that drew it downwards, towards the abyss, the spirit of gravity, my devil and arch enemy. Upwards, although it sat upon me, half dwarf, half mole, paralyzing, dripping lead in mine ear, in thoughts, like drops of lead, into my brain. O Zarathustra, it whispered scornfully, syllable by syllable, thou stone of wisdom, thou threwest thyself high, but to every thrown stone must fall. O Zarathustra, thou stone of wisdom, thou slingstone, thou star destroyer, thyself threwest thou so high, to every thrown stone must fall. Condemned of thyself, and to thine own stoning, O Zarathustra, far indeed threwest thou thy stone, but upon thyself will it recoil. Then was the dwarf silent, and it lasted long. The silence, however, oppressed me, and to be thus in pairs, one is verily lonesomer than when alone. I ascended, I dreamt, I thought, but everything oppressed me. A sick one did I resemble, whom bad torture wearieth, and a worse dream reawakeneth out of his first sleep. But there is something in me, which I call courage. It hath hitherto slain for me every dejection. This courage at last bade me stand still and say, Dwarf, thou or I? For courage is the best slayer, courage which attacketh. For in every attack there is sound of triumph. Man, however, is the most courageous animal, thereby Hath he overcome every animal with sound of triumph? Hath he overcome every pain? Human pain, however, is the sorest pain. Courage slayeth also giddiness at abysses. And where doth man not stand at abysses, is not seeing itself seeing abysses? I get that. To look into yourself could also be an abyss. Courage is the best slayer. Courage slayeth also fellow suffering. Fellow suffering, however, is the deepest abyss. As deeply as man looketh into life, so deeply also doth he look into suffering. Courage, however, is the best slayer. Courage which attacketh, it slayeth even death itself, for it saith, was that life? Well, once more. In such speech, however, there is much sound of triumph. He who hath ears to hear, let him hear. I like that line. Was that life? Well, once more. It sounds like playing a roguelike game where you just got your butt kicked. Dark Souls, anyone? And after losing, you don't quit. You don't say it's over. You start again and you're like, all right, this is what the challenge is. I can accept this. Let's go. Once more. Halt, dwarf, said I. Either I or thou. I, however, am the stronger of the two. Thou knowest not mine abysmal thought. It couldst thou not endure. Then happened that which made me lighter, for the dwarf sprang from my shoulder, the prying sprite, and it squatted on a stone in front of me. There was, however, a gateway, just where we halted. Look at this gateway, dwarf, I continued. It hath two faces. Two roads come together here. These hath no one yet gone to the end of. This long lane backwards, it continueth for an eternity, and that long lane forward, that is another eternity. They are antithetical to one another, these roads. They directly abut on one another, and it is here, at this gateway, that they come together. The name of the gateway is inscribed above, this moment. But should one follow them further, and even further, and further on, thinkest thou, dwarf, that these roads would be eternally antithetical? Everything straight lieth, murmured the dwarf, contemptuously. All truth is crooked. Time itself is a circle. Thou spirit of gravity, said I wrathfully, do not take it too lightly, or I shall let thee squat where thou squattest, halt-foot, and I carried thee high. Observe, continued I, this moment, from this gateway, this moment, there runneth a long eternal lane backwards. Behind us lieth an eternity. Must not whatever can run its course of all things have already run along that lane? Must not whatever can happen of all things have already happened, resulted, and gone by? And if everything have already existed, what thinkest thou, dwarf, of this moment? Must not this gateway also have already existed? And are not all things closely bound together in such wise that this moment draweth all coming things after it, consequently itself also? For whatever can run its course of all things, also in this long lane outward, must it once more run. And this slow spider, which creepeth in the moonlight, and this moonlight itself, and thou and I in this gateway, whispering together, whispering of eternal things, must we not all have already existed? And must we not return and run in that other lane out before us, that long, weird lane? Must we not eternally return? Thus did I speak, and always more softly, for I was afraid of mine own thoughts. and wearier thoughts. Then suddenly did I hear a dog howl near me. Had I ever heard a dog howl thus? My thoughts ran back. Yes, when I was a child, in my most distant childhood. Then did I hear a dog howl thus, and saw it also, with hair bristling, its head upwards, trembling, in the stillest midnight, when even dogs believe in ghosts. So that it excited my commiseration. For just then, with the full moon, silent as death, over the house, just then did it stand still, a glowing globe, at rest on the flat roof, as if on someone's property. Thereby had the dog been terrified, for dogs believe in thieves and ghosts, and when I again heard such howling, then did it excite my commiseration once more. Where was now the dwarf, and the gateway, and the spider, and all the whispering? Had I dreamt? Had I awakened? Twixt rugged rocks did I suddenly stand alone, dreary in the dreariest moonlight. There lay a man, and there the dog leaping, bristling, whining. Now did it see me coming, and did it howl again. Then did it cry. Had I ever heard a dog cry so for help? And verily, what I saw, the like had I never seen. A young shepherd did I see, writhing, choking, quivering, with distorted countenance, and with a heavy black serpent hanging out of his mouth. Had I ever seen so much loathing and pale horror on one countenance? He had perhaps gone to sleep. Then had the serpent crawled into his throat? There had it bitten itself fast. My hand pulled at the serpent, and pulled, in vain. I failed to pull the serpent out of his throat. Then there cried out of me, bite, bite. Its head off, bite. So cried it out of me, my horror, my hatred, my loathing, my pity. All my good and my bad cried with one voice out of me. Ye daring ones around me, ye venturers and adventurers, and whoever of you have embarked with cunning sails on unexplored seas, ye enigma enjoyers, solve unto me the enigma that I then beheld, interpret unto me the vision of the lonesomest one, for it was a vision and a foresight. What did I then behold in parable? And who is it that must come some day? Who is the shepherd unto whose throat the serpent thus crawled? Who is the man unto whose throat all the heaviest and blackest will thus crawl? The shepherd, however, bit as my cry had admonished him. He bit with a strong bite. Far away did he spit the head of the serpent, and sprang up. No longer shepherd, no longer man, a transfigured being, a light surrounded being that laughed. Never on earth laughed a man as he laughed. Oh, my brethren, I heard a laughter which was no human laughter, and now gnaweth a thirst at me, a longing that is never allayed. My longing for that laughter gnaweth at me. How can I still endure to live, and how could I endure to die at present? Thus spake Zarathustra. Quick break. Chapter 47. Involuntary bliss. I think we could do one more if it's short enough. With such enigmas and bitterness in his heart did Zarathustra sail over the sea. When, however, he was 4-day journeys from the Happy Isles and from his friends, then he had surmounted all his pain. Triumphantly, and with firm foot did he again accept his fate. And then talked to Zarathustra in this wise to his exulting conscience. Alone am I again, and like to be so, alone with the pure heaven and the open sea. And again is the afternoon around me. On an afternoon did I find my friends for the first time. On an afternoon also did I find them a second time. At the hour when all light becometh stiller. For whatever happiness is still on its way twixt heaven and earth, now seeketh for lodging a luminous soul. With happiness hath all light now become stiller. O afternoon of my life, once did my happiness also descend to the valley that it might seek a lodging. Then did it find those open hospitable souls. O afternoon of my life, what did I not surrender, that I might have one thing, this living plantation of my thoughts, and this dawn of my highest hope. Companions did this creating one once seek, and children of his hope. And lo, it turned out that he could not find them, except he himself should first create them. Thus am I in the midst of my work, to my children going, and from them returning. For the sake of his children must Zarathustra perfect himself. For in one's heart one loveth only one's child, and one's work, and where there is great love to oneself, then is it the sign of pregnancy. So have I found it. Still are my children verdant in their first spring, standing nigh one another, and shaken in common by the winds, trees of my garden and of my best soil. And verily, where such trees stand beside one another, there are happy isles. But one day will I take them up, and put each by itself alone, that it may learn lonesomeness, and defiance, and prudence. Gnarled and crooked, and with flexible hardness, shall it then stand by the sea, a living lighthouse of unconquerable life. Yonder, where the storms rush down into the sea, and the snout of the mountain drinketh water, shall each on a time have his day and night watches, for his testing and recognition. Recognized and tested shall each be, to see if he be of my type and lineage, if he be master of the long will, silent even when he speaketh, and giving in, such wise that he taketh in giving, so that he may one day become my companion, a fellow creator, and fellow enjoyer with the Zarathustra, such a one as writeth my will upon my tables, for the fuller perfection of all things. And for his sake, and for those like him, must I perfect myself. Therefore do I now avoid my happiness, and present myself to every misfortune for my final testing and recognition. And verily, it were time that I went away. In the wanderer's shadow, in the longest tedium, in the stillest hour, have all said unto me, it is the highest time. The word blew to me through the keyhole and said, come. The door sprang subtly open unto me and said, go. But I lay, enchained, to my love for my children. Desire spread the snare for me, the desire for love, that I should become the prey of my children, and lose myself in them. Desiring, that is now for me to have lost myself. I possess you, my children. In this possessing shall everything be assurance, and nothing desire. But brooding lay the sun of my love upon me. In his own juice stewed Zarathustra, and then did shadows and doubts fly past me. For frost and winter I now longed. Oh, that frost and winter would again make me crack and crunch, sighed I. Then arose icy mist out of me. My past burst its tomb. Many pains buried alive woke up. Fully slept had they merrily, concealed in corpse clothes. So called everything unto me in signs. It is time, but I heard not, until at last mine abyss moved, and my thought bit me. Ah, abysmal thought, which art my thought. When shall I find strength to hear thee burrowing, and no longer tremble? To my very throat throbbeth my heart when I hear thee burrowing. Thy muteness even is like to strangle me, thou abysmal mute one. As yet have I never ventured to call thee up. It hath been enough that I have carried thee about with me. As yet I have not been strong enough for my final lion wantonness and playfulness. Sufficiently formidable unto me hath thy weight ever been. But one day shall I yet find the strength in the lion's voice, which will call thee up. When I shall have surmounted myself therein, will I surmount myself also in that which is greater, and a victory shall be the seal of my perfection. Meanwhile, do I sail along on uncertain seas, chance flattereth me, smooth-tongued chance. Forward and backwards do I gaze, still see I no end. As yet hath the hour of my final struggle not come to me, or doth it come to me perhaps just now? Verily, with insidious beauty do sea and life gaze upon me round about. O afternoon of my life, O happiness before eventide, O haven upon high seas, O peace in uncertainty, how I distrust all of you. Verily distrustful am I of your insidious beauty, like the lover am I, who distrusteth too sleek smiling. As he pusheth the best beloved before him, tender, and even in severity, the jealous one, so do I push this blissful hour before me. Away with thee, thou blissful hour, with thee hath there come to me an involuntary bliss. Ready for my severest pain do I here stand. At the wrong time hast thou come. Away with thee, thou blissful hour, rather harbor there with my children, hasten, and bless them before eventide with my happiness. There already approacheth eventide, the sun seeketh away my happiness. Thus spake Zarathustra, and he waited for his misfortune the whole night, but he waited in vain. The night remained clear and calm. Happiness itself came nigher and nigher unto him. Towards morning, however, Zarathustra laughed to his heart and said mockingly, Happiness runneth after me. That is because I do not run after women. Happiness, however, is a woman. This man is a bit weird. Well, good for him. Fables. Now, we want to go to the never-ending notebook. Actually, let's take a quick look. Our thoughts. Thoughts. Wait for 400 days. Shall waken a king. Birthday will be sooner. Should never leave the caves. We know all about that. Dreamed of a strange place. We know all about that. Like to explore the caves. That one doesn't cross out. It's the items underneath that cross out there. I've explored every part of the cave. It's just like if you were to cross out everything about exploring the cave, it doesn't make sense. You know, it makes more sense to say after the fact, yeah, I've explored all the cave. Yeah, it makes sense, right? So that way that's not crossed out, so these other things, they don't cross out. Secret library. Oh, the dream to find a book that never ends. That is now also crossed out. Probably from the time we've spent reading it. Time goes by faster if you keep your mind occupied. This is another one that's like a header, and all the items underneath it that will allow us to enjoy our time and make time faster. Those have been all crossed out. And then what we currently have. Can't think of anything else right now. I guess I'll just continue waiting in loneliness. Huh. It's strange, the Shade's journey, and reading this book about Zarathustra. There's a lot of things that are very similar. I wonder if the developer had read this book before, and it was inspiration to him, and that's why he included it here with these other books. Because it does feel like with the longing, and perhaps Zarathustra inspired the developer to overcome the darkest parts of himself. And this was an expression of that. A tool, I guess, that perhaps allowed for that process to happen. It's like some other famous movies in anime and stories that I've read. But oftentimes, those stories, as bizarre as they were tools for its creator to go through whatever it was they were going through. That could be a key to making great games. Just go through hardships and then make a game based on that to help you through it. Right. Never-ending notebook. We'll let the Shade continue reading this, and tomorrow we'll have passed some 30-something days. Oh, actually, time itself is... wow. Time is quite fast. 22 seconds? 23? Quite fast, now that we have the other crystal, the painting of the king. Time shall now fly even faster. Have fun, Shade. What if the Shade were to make a game? What would that game be like?